Tuesday. Anybody know what's going on Tuesday? Taco Tuesday, absolutely correct, 100%, because that's an American thing to do. But it's a big day, right? It's election day. And, I think about election day, and I think that we really have three groups of people represented in the room that have different responses towards election day. Some of you are excited about election day, right? And the reason you're excited is because it's kind of like a big mystery. You love mysteries, Agatha Christie, all that kind of stuff. Who's going to win? What are the next 4 years going to be like? Who's going to be president for the next 4 years? All this kind of stuff. You're just excited. You just can't wait. Others of you, you're kind of standing on the outside, kind of watching things like you stand in a circle and watch a middle school fight. You're just waiting to see what's going to break out, Others of you, you just can't wait for election season to be over. You are so tired and weary and bothered and maybe even a little bit worried. You just want all of this to be done, right? But I was thinking about elections, and really when it comes to an election, the main decision that all of us have to make, if we're going to vote at all, is to answer this question. Who should I vote for? Who should I vote for? Now, I realize most of you have already decided who you're going to vote for. Maybe you've already voted. But if you're undecided, this is a big question, right? Who should I vote for? This is a question that we should ask. I mean, we definitely should ask before every election, who should I vote for? But as important as this question is, I think this is the wrong question for us to ask. I think there's a better question for us to ask and answer. And that's this question. How should I vote? How should I vote? Now, you may be wondering what the difference is between those two questions. They seem similar, but in reality, they're not. See, the first question, who should I vote for, is the person question. But the second question, how should I vote, it's the mindset question. And the person question is important, but the person question is personal and complex. And I promise I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I promised you that at the beginning of this series. Why? Because it is a personal and complex decision. However, the second question, the mindset question, how should I vote, is not personal and complex at all. And we're going to see that today out of a story from the book of Daniel. But let me give you kind of a review of what we talked about for the past few weeks as we've been talking about the spirit of our politics. Our goal over the past few weeks is to figure out how we can become like Jesus and do what Jesus would do and live the life that Jesus would live if he were living our life in the midst of our contentious and divided political climate. And so we've been talking about the spirit of our politics, not the spirit of other people's politics, but for those of us who are followers of Jesus and part of the Hub City Church family, the spirit of our politics. And we said that there are really two goals that we're hoping bleed into our lives and bleed out of our lives as a result of this series. The first one is this: as followers of Jesus, the spirit of our politics should be different. That because we are following Jesus, there should be something different about how we speak and behave and act and post online in the midst of this political climate that we find ourselves in. That those who are not followers of Jesus should look at those who are followers of Jesus and say, there's something different about us. That's exactly what happened with the first century Christians in the city of Antioch. Those who were not Christians looked at these new Christians and said, something's different about them. We're going to actually rename them. They're no longer followers of the way. They are Christians. They are little Christ. It was a derogatory term that branded them because they had declared their allegiance to a different king, and because of that, they were living different lives. We should be different. Second goal of this series is that as followers of Jesus, the spirit of our politics should be guided by two principles. The first principle, the dignity of all people, that all people, regardless of what aisle they stand on or if they're in the aisle at all when it comes to politics, are created in the image of God, and all people have value and they matter, and we should treat them with dignity regardless of who they vote for. The second one, to want, will, and work for the good of all people. That there should be something in us as followers of Jesus where we want the good of others. We will the good of others. We work for the good of others regardless of where they stand politically, regardless of whether, in fact, they are our enemies. I mean, over and over again, Jesus says to love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Why? Because God loved us when we were his enemies. That God sent his son Jesus to want, will, and work for our good. We are here today because that is how God approaches us, right? So that's the goal that we've been shooting for in this series. And so building on that foundation, we're going to look at a few verses out of Daniel chapter 2 this morning. Let me kind of give you some context for what's going on. The book of Daniel, I love. You should read the book of Daniel. Let me just warn you, the first 6 chapters are great. Then you get to chapter 7 through 12, and it gets weird. It's cool. Nobody knows what chapter 7 through 12 are about. They'll try and tell you they know what it's about, but nobody knows what it's about. But you should read it anyway. It's kind of like the book of Revelation. You know, like Martin Luther said of the book of Revelation, I have no idea what it's about. So, and he was pretty, influential in our faith, right? So, but if you were to nail down the entire book of Daniel into 2 profound truths, it would be this. It's all about this. To honor God, and he'll honor you, and then that God is in control and he can be trusted. That's really what the book of Daniel is all about. Story after story after story involves those 2 themes. Honor God, he will honor you. God is in control and he can be trusted. Well, today's story involves a dream that kind of highlights that second truth, that God is in control and he can be trusted. Now, for us, when it comes to dreams, those are just things that we have when we're asleep, We wake up in the morning and like, I had the craziest dream. Or if you're like me, you wake up in the morning and say, I had the worst nightmare. I have nightmares all the time. I've had them since I was kids, since I was little. But for us, dreams don't really have much meaning. They're just these weird things that we have when we're sleeping. But that's not true in many parts of the world. In fact, even today, all around the world, dreams are one of the primary ways that God reveals himself to people. You see that over and over again in the Muslim world. You should read some of the stories. It's fascinating how God reveals himself through dreams. In fact, I think that God might want to speak to some of you through a dream, but that's a topic for another day. But dreams are one of the ways that God speaks. And this was especially the case in the ancient world. See, the pagans, those who weren't followers of the living God, the God that we read about in the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, the pagans, they considered dreams to be messages from the gods. And ancient Israelites had dreams that were messages from God. And our story involves King Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan king, who had a dream that was a message from God. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the dream is. You should go and read chapter 2 and get the whole thing, but let me kind of tell you what went on. He has this dream, and it bothered him so much that he wanted his wise men to interpret the dream for him. However, he did not want to tell them what the dream was. He wanted them to tell him what dream he had, and then to interpret it after they told him what dream he had. Now, let me ask you, how's that going to work? I mean, what if I get up in the morning and I'm like, Liz, I had this dream. I want you to tell me what it was and then interpret it for me. She'd just walk out of the room, right? I mean, but that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. But he takes it one step further. He says, listen, guys, I want you to tell me what I dreamed and I want you to interpret it for me. And if you don't, I'm going to execute you. Can you imagine? I mean, Nebuchadnezzar is the prototypical character in the Bible that has not only delusions of grandeur, but a few mental illnesses. You should read his story. That's kind of how it is. But here he is. He has this dream. He wants his wise men to tell him the dream. Then he wants them to interpret the dream. And if they don't do it, he's going to kill them. To which they're like, there's no way we can tell you what you dreamed, Nebuchadnezzar. Tell us the dream. We'll be happy to give you an interpretation, even if it's not a good interpretation. We don't want to die, right? But nothing worked out, and so he issues a kill order. Well, Daniel found out about this and asked for a little bit more time. And so what Daniel does is he recruits his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those 3 guys who wandered into the fiery furnace that we read about in chapter 3 and then wandered back out because God was with them and he saved them. They honored God and God honored them. Those 3 guys. He says, hey guys, will you pray with me tonight? Join me in praying that God would have mercy on us and give me an interpretation to the king's mysterious dream. And miraculously, that's exactly what God did. God answered their prayer. And I want to pick up reading in verse 19. And it says this. It says that night the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. A vision is just a dream that you have when you're awake. So God revealed about a dream through a dream to Daniel, which I find fascinating. Goes on, it says this, then Daniel praised the God of heaven. He said, praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. It goes on, his prayer. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to scholars. It goes on. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in the darkness, though he is surrounded by light. And then he wraps up his prayer this way. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. So he says this prayer. He goes back to the king and he basically tells the king what he dreamed and gives an interpretation of the dream. Like I said, you should read it. It's pretty fascinating what dream he had and the interpretation of the dream. But I'm not concerned about the dream this morning. I'm more interested in one of the lines in Daniel's prayer that he just prayed from verse 21. Let's look at it again. He says this of God. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. Will you read that out loud with me? He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. I want to start with the first line here because for me, the first part brings up more questions than it answers. He controls the course of world events. I mean, that bothers me a little bit, especially when I look at world events, because it doesn't seem as if God is in control. When I look at world history, at times it does not seem as if God is in control of these world events. And so I was bothered by this and decided I'm just going to sit in silence with God in this verse. I did it this past Wednesday. And as I was sitting, I felt like he gave me some clarity. It doesn't happen all the time, but it did this past week. He gave me some clarity and something that was helpful. And I think that maybe it could be helpful to you as well. See, the idea that the Holy Spirit impressed on me when I read this line, he controls the course of world events, is that of a teacher and a classroom. If you think about a teacher and a classroom, a teacher controls their classroom. Not in the fact that they control the students, like forcefully control the students in the classroom, but what they do is they set the direction for the class. They teach the content for the class. They lead students towards an understanding and a mastery of the subject of whatever class is being taught. What the teacher does not control are the choices that the students make, right? Some of the students put in the work, they do what they need to do, and they get a good grade, and they learn what they're supposed to learn in the class. Other students kind of just blow everything off, and they just slide by and barely pass the class, like some of you. Other students, man, they're disruptive, and the teacher has to step in and do something. They just make it difficult for other students to learn. They make it difficult for the teachers to teach. But in all of it, the teacher is directing where the class is going. The teacher is in control of where they're trying to take the students. And I realize there are some holes in that illustration, but man, this was really helpful to me when I think about the fact that God controls the course of world events. See, he is taking us somewhere. He is on a mission. There is an end destination to history. His kingdom is coming. He is making all things new. But we're not there yet. We're in this messy in between. But in all of it, God is in control and he can be trusted. And one of the ways that we know he's in control is what Daniel says in the second line. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He removes kings and sets up other kings. Now that bothers me as well when I think about some of the rulers that this world has had and some of the rulers that this world does have and some of the rulers that this world is going to have. It may even bother you to read that in light of whatever's going to happen with the result of Tuesday's election, right? But he removes kings and sets up other kings. It reminds me of how a teacher sometimes tells a disruptive student to go stand in the hallway. I remember when I was in 8th grade, I couldn't stop coughing in the middle of class, and the teacher was like, just go outside, man. You know? And it was really embarrassing at the time, but, I get it. And that was before COVID. But But also teachers, they sometimes send disruptive students to a principal's office. Other times teachers, they rearrange the classroom and move students around. And you can't sit next to your friend that you talk to anymore. No, you got to go sit next to the nerd, right? And hopefully it'll rub off on you. That they control the course of what's going on in the classroom. They remove students and set up other students around, just like God removes kings and sets up other kings. And I think this is huge in light of Tuesday's election. I think we all need to be reminded of this. We need to keep this theme front and center for us. See, when things seem to be going off the rails politically, we can start to wonder, is God really in control? Well, what the book of Daniel tells us is that God is always in control and he can be trusted. He's even in control when there is an evil ruler like Nebuchadnezzar who has a number of mental illnesses and delusions of grandeur and has issued a kill order for your life, right? It's not the only time he did that. But it shows us that God is in control. Actually, God is always in control and he can be trusted. See, God is governing the world according to his purposes, and I'll be the first to admit that I don't agree with all of the things that God is doing, and I don't understand all of the things that God is doing. But we're reminded in Isaiah that God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And sometimes we think we're pretty smart, but we are not as smart as God. He is the one who's always in control, and he can be trusted. So for those of you who may be fearful or uncertain or even angry with the results of the upcoming election, Daniel has something to tell you. Our God is in control, always, and he can be trusted. Now, what's fascinating to me is that this verse isn't just like a one and done in the book of Daniel. In fact, this theme bleeds through the entire book. I want to show you a couple of other verses which say almost the exact same thing, but to different kings and at different times. Look at this out of Daniel chapter 4, verse 17. For this has been decreed by the messengers, it is commanded by the Holy One, so that everyone may know the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world. He gives them to anyone he chooses, even to the lowliest people, that last part, I feel like every politician that we vote into office should put that plaque on their door frame. Just a reminder, guys, before you start thinking, but that's a whole nother topic. Okay, let me show you another time it shows up. Until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses. Later on, the exact same thing. Until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses. And then in Daniel chapter 5, it says, until he learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. Now, I know you know this. We've talked about this before, but whenever you see something repeated in Scripture, it is screaming at you that you better pay attention to this. See, they didn't have ancient highlighters. They didn't have bold text. What they did to highlight something in Scripture was to repeat it. And this is repeated 5 times in the book of Daniel, which means this is really, really important. This should cause us to pause and take notice that the Most High God rules over the kingdom of the world. Can you flip to the next slide? There you go. Rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. The Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over him. And I don't know if you remember from the previous verses that we looked at, there was this other theme there, like so that everyone may know, or until you learn, or until he learned. It's like we're not supposed to miss the fact that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. In fact, let's just read this out loud together to kind of let it sink in. The Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. I don't have a slide for this, but maybe you could scratch out the kingdoms of the world and put in the United States of America. Might be helpful coming up Tuesday. But what does this verse mean to us, or this theme mean to us? Well, I think it's a reminder that God was in control in Babylon, and he's also in control in the United States of America. He moved in history then to accomplish his purposes, and he's moving in history now to accomplish his purposes. Just like he's saying he's the same God. He moved in power then, and he's moving in power now. He was in control then, and he is in control now. And regardless, and this is going to bother some of us, it bothers me a little bit. Regardless of who wins or who loses on Tuesday, and despite all of the outrage and division that are plaguing our country, God is in control, and he can be trusted. And our job as followers of Jesus is to trust our God, who's in control, who is working in and through history, taking us somewhere. He's working in and through you and me, taking the world somewhere. Let that sink in for just a minute. To accomplish his purposes. And I think that's the mindset we should have as followers of Jesus. That is how we should vote. Whenever you walk into the voting booth on Tuesday, or if you're like Liz and I, we voted on Friday early. Walk in with this idea that God is in control and he can be trusted. I love what Michael Ware in his book, The Spirit of Our Politics, writes. He says, in politics, as in all of life, I'm glad he added that as in all of life. This means we do not bear the burden of ensuring things turn out right at all costs. Some of us need to put that on a note card where we see it all the time. Jesus is in control, and he has paid the price. Our call is to be faithful with what we have, leaving the outcomes to him and trusting him. I love that. I love that. Jesus is in control. Our job is to be faithful, leaving the outcomes to him and trusting him. So, really what I want to leave you with today is a question. How can you remind yourself this week that God is in control and that he can be trusted? Not how can you remind someone else that God is in control and that he can be trusted. Just worry about you this week. How can you remind yourself that God is in control and that he can be trusted? One place where I would encourage you to start is with the verse we saw repeated over and over again. That the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. Maybe you should commit that to memory. That when you walk into the voting booth, that you say to yourself, the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. Maybe when you're watching the news or refreshing your internet page, trying to see who won the election, that you remind yourself that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. Maybe when you read about something that's going on in Russia or the Ukraine or Israel or Gaza or Sudan or wherever the latest conflict is blowing up in the world, that you remind yourself that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. That's where you start. But then I just want to give you some freedom that when you are uncomfortable with who is ruling the kingdoms of the world and you don't really like the decisions that God is making, God's cool with you talking to him about it. Do you remember where Daniel was? Daniel was a good old Jewish boy from Jerusalem who had been marched hundreds of miles across a terrible desert as a slave, taken into exile in Babylon and forced to work for a pagan king who did not believe in his God and did not have the same traditions that he grew up in. His life was basically hanging on by a thread. God showed him favor because he honored God and God honored him. But man, that didn't happen to all the Jewish exiles. But throughout his life, we see over and over again that Daniel lived with this front and center, that God is in control and he can be trusted. And so whenever you're unsure about what's going on, I think God's cool with that. You can raise your hand and say, God, I don't really like what's going on in the world right now. It bothers me, but I trust you. And then you could follow that up with like, how can I do something about it? What's something that I can do? This isn't in my notes, but it makes me think of what we're doing in Haiti. You know, we kind of don't talk about it all the time. Some of you guys know we have a partnership in Haiti with an orphanage and with a village in the mountains. And we took trips there for years until there was a government coup and things just went to hell, literally went to hell in Haiti. And so basically all we can do now is pray and send money that secretly gets there, which is pretty phenomenal and miraculous in and of itself. Some of you know that our orphans in Haiti had their orphanage destroyed by gangs. They were forced to go move to a different town. They found lodging. They had to leave that lodging because of the gangs. They found other lodging. And then this past week, because of gang warfare, they were airlifted miraculously, really miraculously, from where they are in the village of Archei to the northern part of Haiti, where things are a little bit more peaceful, right? When I look at the situation in Haiti, it bothers me. What in the world is God doing? It doesn't seem as if God is in control. But the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. I trust that he's up to something. And I thank him that he rescued our friends. And we do our part to help in that situation by praying and by continuing to give. You know, every time you give, when you put stuff in the baskets or give online, 6% of what you give goes to help in Haiti. They've got to find new places to live now. Got to go to new schools, a bunch of stuff. But some of you sponsor kids that are over there. That is a way to enter into what God is doing as he is making all things new and as he is bringing his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So, what do you need to do this week to remind yourself that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them? I think one of the best things that we can do in light of that is just to do exactly what Daniel did. I don't know if you realized from Daniel's prayer, but it was a prayer of worship and a prayer of praise. And I think our response to who God is and what he's up to in the world should always be one of worship, even if we don't like what's going on. If you look through the Psalms, all these Psalms are laments. They start with complaints and end with praise. They always follow that pattern. They start with complaints and they end with praise.